All right. Hi, everyone. A very warm welcome to our webinar, Putting the Human into Resource Management. My name is Nora, and I'm pleased to be your host for this webinar. My passion is to unleash the potential of organizations and people by tapping into the future of work and creating more productive, adaptive, human, and joyful ways of working. I'm very excited. I can feel my heart right now that you're all joining us today. Thank you so much for taking that time of your day. And I'm so excited for this upcoming session, which will be so inspiring, I guarantee you. But before we kick off, I would love to get a sense for who is here with us today. So I've prepared 2 check-in questions for you. First of all, I'm very curious to learn where in the world are you joining us from today? And also, what has made you smile lately? So please feel free to write the answers to these 2 questions in the chat, and just make sure while you're sending your message to send it to everyone. So Ed is joining us from San Fran, and birds chirping outside my window. Oh, that's beautiful. Yeah, it's morning time for you. Wonderful. We've got Pedro from the UK. Wonderful. The robins are outside. So again, we've got a theme here of birds. That's beautiful. I think the birds over here are already asleep in Berlin. From Vancouver. Hi, Nicole. Neighbors. Orgy puppy. Oh, that's very cute. So we've got animals making people smile a lot. We've got Edwin, our guest in Toronto. A new guilty pleasure. Started watching Love is Blind. Oh, I have not heard of that. That's cool. We've got Frank joining us. Hi, Frank, from Arnhem, the Netherlands. And the teal safari in Berlin made him smile. That's super nice to hear. We've got friends and excitement for the upcoming autumn. Beautiful. We've got Doug from New Zealand joining us. Good morning, Doug. Wonderful to see you. We've got Denmark, Nashville, Tennessee, another participant from Denmark. Wow. Whew, that's so beautiful. So many reasons to smile. And maybe also this webinar can contribute to a cheerful atmosphere of your day today. So that would be super nice. I would like to introduce our program that we're running for those of you who are joining us for the first time. You're joining our brand new webinar series called LEAP, Igniting the Future of Resource Management. And with that series, our goal is really to reinvent the rather traditional approach to resource management and unpack fresh, inspiring perspectives for the community, for you, on how this could look like. And by doing that, we really aim to empower resource managers and business strategy leads by sharing quite actionable advice that makes you better both professionally and personally. And also we're hoping to elevate the role of the resource management function by increasing the visibility on the positive organizational impact that resource management can have inside an organization. And we're running these webinars on a monthly basis. At the end of this episode, I will give you a brief glimpse into what's waiting for us next month, so you can start to get excited. And you might be wondering who's running the series. It's Run. I've also got my lovely Run sweater here today. And Run is a resource management software, and the goal is to solve the challenges of matching work to be done inside an organization and finding the best suited people for the job. So in case you're interested in finding out more, please visit our website. That would be lovely. And next up, it's my absolute pleasure to introduce the 2 stars of this webinar, Ed and Edwin. We were thinking 2 ads are definitely better than 1. That's why we've got a fantastic ad crew with us today. And I'm going to share my screen again because I've prepared a little slide for us. to introduce the two. So first up, we've got Ed Fraunheim. And Ed is really all about reinventing three things: reinventing masculinity, organizations, and society. And he's really passionate about connecting the dots among these three different spheres for a more soulful world, which I find very beautiful. He is an author, speaker, coach, and consultant. And his writings have appeared in major publications such as USA Today, Harvard Business Review, and Fortune. So that's just a little taste of where his writings have been published, which I find very astonishing. Ed has previously served as Director of Research and Content at the Great Place to Work Institute, and he's co-written a number of books, and I would just like to call out one which I've got sitting in my shelf, which I would highly recommend, and it's called Reinventing Masculinity: The Liberating Power of Compassion and Connection. And amongst other endeavors, Ed has also co-founded the TEAL team to study and advocate for more soulful organizations. So Ed, it's an absolute pleasure to have you here. Thank you so much for joining us. And also we've got Edwin, not to be confused. Edwin Jansen is the Chief Steward and CEO of Fuse Cooperative, the staffing industry's first and only platform cooperative, which means Fuse is owned and managed by the staffing firms and independent recruiters who are its members. So it's quite a pioneering effort. And this innovative business was born out of Edwin's experience in the TLOS operating system, an organizational operating system that empowers every employee to do their best work without any bosses or hierarchy. And he's also a speaker on new ways of working. And his passion is really to help build a world where most people love their work, which is so far out of our reach at this point. And he believes that by doing so, we will tap naturally more and more into self-management practices because they enable people to really enjoy their work a lot more. And just for your little smile today, because that's one of our themes, I asked them about some fun facts. So Ed used to be a synchronized swimmer in high school, which I'm very impressed by. And Edwin was actually born in Green Bay, Wisconsin. So he is officially a cheesehead. I'm so disappointed, Edwin, you're not wearing a cheesehead today, but that's okay.
Oh, I can go and get it. It's actually just right over there. And I have my Packers helmet right here.
That works too.
You know, at any given moment,
go Packers.
I will talk about the Green Bay Packers.
Please do. I've lived in Wisconsin for a year, so my heart is very connected to that place. So absolutely weave anything into our webinar today that you feel might be joyful for people or make people smile. And just for our audience, as a heads up, we'll use the last 15 to 20 minutes for our Q&A. You can use the Q&A button to ask any questions. Feel free to use the chat to share your thoughts. That's hugely encouraged. And just make sure to send it to everyone so that everyone benefits from your comments and not just as us as panelists. Wonderful. So to kick us off, I would love to dive into the story of Raise. Raise is a Canadian staffing firm that used new approaches to work and how it gets assigned to not only survive COVID, but really thrive in this very uncertain and difficult time. And I've got this number stuck in my mind, Edwin, around an increase of revenue by 650%. So, Edwin, can you please share this phenomenal story with us and tell us more of what happened there and what we can learn from it?
Sure. Yeah, so Raise is a Canadian staffing firm that I worked for over 10 years. And back in, I think it was 2007, we read the book Reinventing Organizations by Frederick Laloux, which I know has inspired Ed and you, Nora, and maybe quite a few people on this call as well. Essentially, what the book talks about, and they actually look at 12 different organizations as examples, that one of the biggest reasons why people don't love their work, or the biggest reasons why people do love their work, is the quality of the manager. If the manager's really great, then people love what they do. Unfortunately, Gallup, who's been studying these things and employee engagement for 30, 40 years, they say 9 out of 10 people don't have what it takes to be a great manager. They don't have the orientation to be a great manager. And so after we read this book, we realized let's go and experiment with
Mm,
removing positional authority. So why is it that, in the rest of our adult life, we make our own decisions and we decide what we're going to do and what we're excited to do. But in our working life, it's almost like we're children, and the boss is the parent. So
right.
we went about and we reinvented all of the practices that would require a manager to have special authority. Hiring, firing, performance management, strategy setting, goal setting, all of these things. And that sounds absolutely crazy to many of you, I'm
Yes.
sure. Yeah. How the hell would that work? That's chaos. Because we invented practices that require that a person takes what we call radical responsibility for
Mm,
what they're doing, how they do it, what they decide to do or not to do. And then in terms of making decisions or doing things that affect other people, you need to get their advice and you need to get their
mhm.
consent. So things can't happen to you in what we call the teal operating system. So we had created this operating system and we actually won, Ed used to work for Great Place to Work. We won the number 2, best place to work in all of Canada a few years ago. And then COVID hit. When COVID hit, we're in the staffing industry. We lost 70% of our job orders, 70% of our business overnight, essentially. Because as you can imagine, no one's hiring. In fact,
Right.
everyone's doing hiring freezes or layoffs, right?
Yeah. Quite the
And
opposite.
quite the opposite, yeah. So it was obviously a very scary time for everyone, but really, and especially our industry. So all of our competitors, all of these staffing firms, they do what you do when you lose 70% of your business. You go into hiring freezes and layoffs yourself. It's essentially a fear contraction response. But at our organization, there is no unilateral decision to go and do layoffs.
Right.
And so we use a Patrick Lencioni tool called the thematic goal, which collectively gets everyone to decide what's most important right now. And so we had some thematic goal around collaboration. I don't know what it was. And then COVID hit, and we're like, okay, that doesn't matter anymore. So very quickly, a group of people got together and tried to collectively decide what is most important right now. What is our new thematic goal? And so within a month, the entire company, which is, I think, at the time around 400 employees, had the
Right.
new thematic goal of basically pivot. If your customers are not hiring, find ones who are. Like, who needs our help in the world right
Mm,
now? Because what we're really good at is staffing and recruiting. So I think the first thing that we got involved in were a bunch of retirement homes and nursing homes, which, if
mm,
you remember at the beginning of COVID, they really needed extra staff. Then we got involved in sending laptops home and empowering customer service centers that no longer could be working in the office, and they had to now send their workers home and get them all set up. And then the Canadian province of Ontario, who was one of our clients, because we had done some really great work sending laptops home and figuring out how to set up their workers, they asked us if we could help with their new function that they had to do, which is called contact tracing,
mhm.
which is basically, if you remember, for COVID, if you get COVID, you've got to find out who were all the people that you've been in contact with, and so they had to hire eventually thousands of people to perform this function that didn't exist before COVID, and no one knew how to do it. We didn't know how to do it, but we basically had a whole company of people that were just looking to provide as much value as they could, and were highly motivated to do that. So that contact tracing then led to vaccine scheduling, and that's essentially what led to we grew not only our revenue, we grew our net income
Mm,
650% in the first 2 years of COVID. And what
amen.
was interesting, yeah, it was fantastic. So we did a retrospective after the first year, just trying to understand what the heck just happened. How did we get hit with, losing 70% of your business, but then end up and turn around and actually have the most successful fiscal year of our 65-year company history. And there was lots of reasons, lots of little reasons, obviously, lots of great individual and team performances. But the thing that rose to the top as clearly the impetus was this teal operating system, which empowered every person to define what their greatest and most meaningful work is. And
Mhm.
that's what I believe is actually most potentially valuable to the resource managers that we have on the call today. Because to some degree, everyone shares this same challenge,
Mhm.
which is who knows best what their own greatest work could be. The individual knows. The manager does not know and could never know. So we actually ended up architecting, which I'm happy to talk about, a process called the role advice process,
Mm.
which empowers the individual to set their own course with the advice and consent of those around them, including potentially their manager. So I think that there's some really neat tools and approaches that I think any company, any organization could apply, regardless of whether they have managers or not.
Wow. That's such an inspiring story. Thank you so much for giving us a brief glimpse into what happened back then and how Ray's reacted in an incredible way. Ed, I would love for us to bridge that incredible story into the reality of resource managers today. What can we learn from this instance? What are some elements that might not be as radical that people could take away from this session?
Sure, Nora. Thank you. And I'm also inspired by Edwin's story. I've heard it a number of times, and it always like gives me chills. Like it's so inspiring and encouraging. And yeah, to me, it's like this testament to what can happen when you tap the power of the human spirit. And inviting everybody to share what we can do now, and that pivot to change and find a way, Edwin, as you put it. And as you said, Nora, not every company is as radical as Ray's. I hope Edwin will talk more about that role advice process, which I've learned a little bit about. But for companies that aren't that, you know, progressive or radical, maybe not have ever heard of teal, which is inspiring to me too. What are some of these other ways we could learn from that story? I think there's several, and some of them are relatively practical and not so dramatic. The first one, as I see it, is for resource managers and organizations to create profiles that tap and understand people's passions. So, in other words, how do we let employees say what is their meaningful work, their greatest work, as Edwin put it? Let's create some visibility into what employees on a team or throughout an organization, what makes them light up, what do they really want to do, and when you do this idea, when you connect people to their passions or invite them to share it, you might not just talk about professional skills and interests, but their personal passions, because
Mhm.
sometimes those can be avenues of innovation or creativity or just helping people love your organization. And one great example that I'm familiar with is a client I work with called Credit Acceptance. It's an auto finance firm. They started a program a couple of years ago called the Unburied Life Program, where they basically were trying to help people care for themselves better during the pandemic, improve their mental well-being by saying, what are these dreams that may have gotten buried in the course of the day-to-day life that you've
Oh,
lived, and surface those dreams, and the company then kind of help them achieve them. And that led to all these kinds of interesting collaborations where people were sharing publicly on the internet what they wanted to do, like give public speeches or learn how to speak sign language, and find people together who could take a course together on these things. So there's a lot of power in understanding what your people want to do and what really moves them. Okay, another baby step in this idea toward more bottom-up resource management is posting the job needs you have and inviting team members to apply for them. Let them raise their hands, like raise, but a little more, maybe a little less radical. And this kind of adds transparency to that resource allocation process. In other words, you can find out who's really fired up about filling the job gaps you notice. So maybe you're still deciding really where we need to put people, but instead of directing people, really try to make it more of a choice for your staff to do it. A third step that I've seen out there is to get more granular in the way you approach resource management. And what I mean here is to go beyond traditional job descriptions or project overviews and break the work down into the specific skills and roles required. Mm-hmm. And I see more organizations practicing what some are calling role-based talent management. And one example is a German advertising firm named Virtual Minds, and I just got to do a profile of them. They make it possible for people to cobble together a work portfolio, if you will, of different roles that they play. And some of them are not what you would consider all in a traditional job description. One guy I talked to is an HR specialist, an organizational development leader, who also has a passion for international commerce. So he mostly does HR stuff, but he also helps the product roll out. So it's going to be tailored for different companies because he loves that. And then that wouldn't have been possible if you weren't sort of recognizing that there are specific parts of these different jobs. And let's get a little more detailed about what needs to be done. So, and then let's turn over to that question of more decision-making power too, and how to tap people's human desire to participate and act as adults, as Edwin put it. You can experiment with that kind of collective sense-making and decision-making. So we heard Ray's staffers come together and pivot and figure out what was possible for the business. You don't have to just be that dramatic to have everyone come together. You can do other kinds of activities that really tap into the collective wisdom of your people. One example that I'm familiar with is a software company called Asana. It's a project management company. Many folks on the call may use it. What they do twice a year is bring folks together from all levels of the company for what they call Roadmap Week. And they're basically saying, where should we go as a company? What are some ideas out there? So it's kind of that sensing of where is the next big thing? Where can we go that's wise? But it's not just relying on the C-suite or the leaders and the HR team, even the resource managers. It's really letting folks right on the ground, the front lines have a say and say, this is what I'm seeing out there from our customers or in the world. And they're a very successful company, partly because of this collective sense making. One other example or research point I'll mention on this point, when I was at Great Place to Work, we came up with a concept called innovation by all. And what we meant here is that the more that organizations invited people to share ideas and products and services and new ways of working, the faster their revenue grew. So the most inclusive organizations on innovation activities, they grew revenue 5.5 times faster than the organizations that were the least inclusive in their innovation activities.
Amazing.
So the kind of sensing and responding invitation for people to have a say that Edwin was talking about really does pay off for all companies.
That's
and
fantastic.
so kind of something. Go ahead, Nora.
Yeah, I was just saying that's fantastic. So it's not just looking like it's the right thing, but you can financially see the impact as well.
Yeah, and happy to point people toward that research on the Great Place to Work site if they want to get a deeper dive there. And one way to look at this is it really about an evolution of talent management. For about a decade ago, I was a reporter writing about resource management for Workforce Management magazine, and I remember that the cutting edge back then was IBM, the computer company. They had created a globally integrated system for allocating talent and standardizing skills. And they use sophisticated labor demand forecasts to kind of assign people different places. And it was, it's awesome. We're more efficient. But it was almost dehumanizing. It was much more of a machine than anything else. And, yes, they were developing the skills of employees along the way, but there was little to no input from the people that made up IBM. And that's not a great recipe for success today. Because what we're really shifting into is a more human era. And that's actually what author Dov Seidemann talks about today. Even though we're advancing in our technology, AI is taking off. The skills, the qualities of a human being in some ways are the most important. Skills like creativity, passion, character, and a collaborative spirit. And this is what this author Dov Seidemann says. The ability to leverage these strengths will be the source of one organization's superiority over another. So I think that's really true. And what I've seen at Raise and many other leading organizations supports what Seidemann says. It's also the message, Nora, that you're sharing here on these Run Leap webinars. A new way of organizing and allocating work is emerging, where companies are called to tap the creativity and the passions of the people and to share decision-making power. And to thrive in this new era, organizations truly must put the human into resource management.
Beautifully put. Thank you for sharing that quote. Yeah, that resonates a lot. So what I'm hearing from you, Ed, is a lot about making things more visible on both sides, really understanding holistically what a human brings along in terms of talents, competencies, passion. So I think that requires some sense of self-awareness first to understand what am I actually all about. And then it's about finding elegant and effective ways of sharing that and also matching that with the project you mentioned, more granularity, right? When it comes to what do we actually need. And I think by getting more visibility on both sides, the human side and the project side, we can get so much more effective on matchmaking those two spheres. And I loved your example of the internal marketplace and how, we can just post different jobs to be done, projects, and see who is actually keen, right? And by introducing more collaborative ways to make people feel a part of creating something, that's the best way to get buy-in. So I love that aspect as well. Very well put. Thank you, both Edwin and Ed. So let's dive right into our interview/conversation. When we prepared this, there were some really intriguing questions that came into my mind. So I would just like to unpack a few of them. And to our dear audience, please feel very invited and free to share any questions of your own in the chat. And what we'll actually do, if we have more questions that we can answer in this live webinar, we will actually do a Q&A after the webinar session where we'll dive into all remaining questions. So we'll record that session for you and share it afterwards. So feel free to go nuts with questions. That's awesome. So the first question for both of you is, how does the assignment of work look like in a self-organization? Who actually does the assigning here?
Can I take this? And I just before we get into this one, can I just respond to a few of the things that Ed was talking about? I wrote some notes because I think he made some really valid points relative to how we've chosen to organize ourselves at Raise. Number one, this idea of roles, not jobs, is a really valuable concept that I want to just kind of double click on. So the traditional way that we've organized ourselves is with a job description, and it's a set of responsibilities that you have, goals or impacts that you need to make, and then the perception of the qualifications or experiences that you need to have in order to fulfill those things. But what job descriptions end up being is kind of a mishmash of a bunch of different roles. So let's say we would say, for my background is in being a marketing leader. So my marketing leader has to have some strategic roles. It has to have some creative roles and responsibilities. It has to have some people management roles and responsibilities. But let's say I'm pretty good at one of those three things. I'm okay at the second one, and I suck at the third. Right? Well, why is it that we believe that we need to put all three of those roles into the same job description?
It's so rigid.
And the chances that you're going to find someone who's really good at all three things are actually quite low. And here's a dirty little secret, a sad secret of the staffing industry. Only 50% of people live up to the expectations of what they're hired in to do. So that's like flipping a coin.
Mm.
That's terrible, right? So if you instead think in terms of roles, we would say those three things are three distinct roles. And Edwin, you're really good at the people leadership, but you suck at the creative kind of task management and organizing of all of the people.
I would disagree. I think you're very creative.
But no, I'm actually very creative, but I'm actually not very good at organizing all of the creative and project plans and all of that. You're really good at that, Nora. So what I found is when I gave up my kind of managerial status, where I actually, it was a liberating experience because I no longer needed to be good at all of the things that I actually wasn't
Oof.
really good at.
What a relief.
And I was able to say, hey, here's this kind of task management, project management, role. Who wants to do that? And then it's not my responsibility anymore. So we can, and this is again, this can exist in an environment that has managers as well as one that doesn't, is to actually get it down to the atomic unit of what is the role being done here.
Amazing.
The other thing that I want to just double click on as to what Ed was talking about is when you think about what is resource management, it's understanding what people have, what people can do, what people want to do, and then marrying or matching that up with what the business needs. And that's exactly how we chose to structure our role advice process. So if you imagine a Venn diagram, a three-circle diagram, overlapping diagram. So there's essentially three questions that every person who's doing a role advice process needs to answer. First for themselves. So they'll do a self-assessment, then they share the self-assessment with their advisors, then their advisors give them advice, then they make a proposal. Those three things line up perfectly to what resource management overall needs to figure out. Number one, what are you good at? What is your knowledge, skills, experiences, resume stuff, the what of what you can do? This is something that I'm sure the resource management software run and others, like, they do a decent job of quantifying that because that's what we're used to already doing with resumes. Pretty easy to do. Second thing, equally if not way more important, what are you passionate about? What do you want to learn? What kind of difference do you want to make? What do you want to work on? I would guess that that's something that we have not done a good job of cataloging and helping people to discover for themselves, and then more importantly, put into some system somewhere so that we can actually match people with jobs that they care about. So this is something that we chose to do through the role advice process. There's a number of self-assessment questions that the person needs to answer. And then they're essentially creating a document that they're sending out to their advisors. So again, anyone can do this. Just create a space within Run or within whatever knowledge system and ask those people those questions. What are you passionate about? What do you want to do? What do you want to learn? What kind of difference do you want to make? And then make that publicly available. Why are we hiding this? That shouldn't be a secret. That should be, for every person's profile, the number one thing that you can actually see. And I would recommend that you use Simon Sinek's format for stating a purpose, which is to do what, so that what. And if everyone understands what their own personal purpose is, so mine is to encourage people to do their most meaningful work so that more people are fulfilled, successful, and happy. So if you know my purpose statement, you know what kind of shit I like to do, right?
And that's why you're here.
Like,
Yeah.
to like mute him when he says swear words. Okay,
Oh
fine.
yeah, sorry. I'm not supposed to say that. Okay. So that's the second. That's the second thing is what's the person passionate about?
Yes.
And then the third thing Ed talked about. What does the company need? What problems or opportunities does the company have? Do managers, leaders, does the business have?
Fantastic.
And that was another thing that I felt personally liberated by when I, gave up my managerial responsibilities.
Yes.
Because previously my problem was strategy. My problem was we didn't hit our numbers. My problem was where are we going to be in 2 years? My problem was, where do we get new revenue from? But now in this different framework, this is everybody's problem. My only responsibility is to share the problem publicly.
Yeah.
Oh my God, I don't know what to do about this. Or, hey, I have an opportunity. We got a big new customer and we need this, this, and this. Who wants in? So
Fantastic.
again,
So
yeah,
so
just sharing that.
liberating. It's so
Yes.
liberating, and also it's so much more fun. Personally, I love collaboration for some tasks so much more than being on my own. So it's also tapping into that collaborative spirit, as you called it at earlier. So yeah, wow, sounds very yeah, sounds very sensible. So coming back to my question for one moment, you two, I love your passion. So how does the assignment of work look like in a self-organization? Who does the assigning? So if we go back to your example, Edwin, could you just maybe in a summary explain to us how that looks like specifically?
Yeah, and again, this is where it's going to be different for a self-managing organization, but not that different. So in a self-managing organization, it's all done by proposals and then consent, and we literally use thumbs, but
Nice.
consent doesn't mean I agree with that. I think that's the greatest proposal. Consent means I can live with that. I don't see how that there's a major risk to the business, and I've given you my advice. So that's up to you whether you're going to, use my ideas, which are the greatest, but the proposal you're making, I can live with that. And so you can use that same, framework in a manager organization. You can say to the person, hey, it's your responsibility to propose to me what roles you want to have or what your job's going to be.
Right.
And my role is to give you advice, and then you make the proposal, and I can say yes to that proposal. So that's how work, and it doesn't get assigned, it gets proposed. And
Right.
there's a massive, massive difference there in terms of engagement and creativity and innovation and all of that.
That's amazing. And Frank just shared in the chat one principle, which I also love so much: good enough for now, safe enough to try, which can be a very helpful guidance in those kind of processes. So thanks, Frank, for sharing.
Nora, can I jump in with a quick follow-up
Yes, of course.
on that topic? I love that role advice process that Edwin just walked us through. It's such a great innovation that you all have created, Edwin. And I think in that point that you just made about proposal versus assignment, also beautiful. And another way to think about it maybe at a more 30,000 foot level is that the assignment of work in a self-organizing company, if you will, it's like co-creation. It's not necessarily that the employee alone is choosing things. It's not that the manager is choosing things. It's a conversation sort of or a shared decision, so that there's no people aren't being bossed around, which is so common and that kills so much of the human spirit.
Yes.
And so and Edwin's thumbs up, thumbs down stuff. There's a lot of cool, efficient methods for getting that kind of clarity on the decision. So it's not bogged down in endless conversations that don't ever go anywhere or that take forever to get a decision. There are newer ways to get to the conclusion quicker. So, but the key idea is that it's not that people are being infantilized and being told what to do. It's more that they have a say in what they do.
Brilliant.
Yeah, we're probably not going to let you get to all of your questions here, Nora, because I want to just keep responding to what Ed's talking about here. But I think that this is another concept that is broadly applicable, which is today in a typical organizational hierarchy, the manager decides and tells, instructs, directs. Okay. The principle that a self-organizing company has is that collective intelligence is always smarter than an individual's intelligence, provided that every individual is heard in the collective decision-making process.
Nice.
And so we use, there's one particular tool that we kind of stole from Holacracy, which is called generative decision making.
Mhm.
And the idea is that one person comes with an initial proposal, and then the group generates, by adding advice, generates a better proposal and one that is collectively adopted and then consented to. And again, like, this is an idea that anyone can have. And the way that it works so beautifully is, first the proposal comes out. First, there's clarifying questions. Let's understand what's being proposed, what's in scope, what's not in scope. What do you mean by this exactly? Just questions. Then there's a round of advice. You know, the intention is to make that proposal better. There's also, like, here's my problem with it. Here's what I think it needs. Then there's typically a proposal version 2. And that proposal version 2 usually goes to a vote. Can we live with that? Do we consent with that? Now, the key thing is you can object. But an objection implicates you in working with the proposer to make the proposal better, to get over your objection.
Mm-hmm.
You can't just be like, I don't, this is terrible, I'll see you later. You can say, I think that whatever, it's too much of an investment, or there needs to be a tighter timeline on evaluating the ROI or whatever. And then the proposer says, okay, oh, that actually makes the proposal better. So let me incorporate your objection. And then would you consent? Yes, now I would consent.
It's a
So
constructive way of
yes, and the impetus
improving
is
it.
always to move forward. It's always getting better, 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 and it's always bringing people along, as opposed to the manager decided proposal A was better and I liked proposal B, and now I'm grudgingly kind of going along with it because the manager decided that.
Right. Love it. Let me inject with one more question from my list, and then I would like to move over to Q&A. So team, get ready. Put some questions in there, please. So what you're describing sounds to me like a paradigm shift. People choosing their best work. So my question to you is, in that paradigm shift, what is the role of the resource manager?
One way that I could address that, Nora, is almost like a air traffic controller. That you're coordinating, the information's coming into you about what the business needs. The information is coming into you about what the people want to do that are possible. The landing strips for a particular project, say, and it's not so much that you are giving directions, but you are directing people and knowing all the needs. So you're kind of a clearinghouse, a coordinator. And that's not to say it's not strategic, or it's maybe even more important, because you're clarifying what are these desires and passions, and understanding them, understanding the business needs, gathering that information, and that ability to communicate well, to see clearly what is going on and what's needed by the business, what's needed and desired by the people, and to coordinate some of those shared decisions that we were talking about. That's a vital role, but it's more of a coordinator, orchestrator, air traffic controller than it is someone who is assigning. I think that's a key. I love that, Edwin, you picked up on that word. That'd be my sense of how to think about the new paradigm.
Nice. Beautiful picture.
There's a fantastic book called Primed to Perform, and it's a data-driven analysis of various HR practices, everything from compensation setting, like team culture, team building, learning and development, all of the things that we put money into from an HR point of view. And it's looked at the impact of those things on performance, on the performance of the organization. Okay. And the single greatest thing that you can do from an HR perspective that drives performance was something that I had never even heard of before.
We're listening.
Role design.
Mm-hmm.
Role design has something like an 87% impact on the performance of the organization. How effectively you design roles.
Wow.
Crazy.
Tell us more about that.
Crazy. So to answer your question, I would say the same thing as Ed, but in my mind, it's two clear things. Role of the resource manager. Number one, we need to know, what are people good at? What are they passionate about? That needs to be in systems that we can look at, that we can put our AIs on, because soon AIs are going to be helping us to make the right choices, pulling in the right people in the right ways. But it's not going to do that unless we have the data. So we need to know, what are people good at? What are people passionate about? And then the third thing that we also need to know, and needs to be in systems, is what are all the business problems and opportunities that people have? So to me, like, that is so critical. The second thing is also super critical. It's the process. What is the process by which people do and change work quickly?
Right. Oh, I
Right.
love that.
Yeah. So it's we use a lot about 6 hats thinking. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but information share is white hat, process is blue hat. So resource managers, white hat, blue hat, as it relates to role design. And then go and use that prime to perform book when you're going and telling your CEO, like, here's why you should just let me design the process here, because this is how we're going to be more productive.
Brilliant. Awesome. Thank you both very much for outlining the new role and potentially, roles of the resource manager, right? So fantastic. I've just had a look at the Q&A. So please, if you have questions, I can't monitor both the chat and the Q&A. Please put it into the Q&A and also vote on the ones that you find most interesting. I can see that there are 2 questions in there right now. So I'm going to pick the one that already has some thumbs up as well, from Pedro. Thank you, Pedro, for sharing a question. How do we apply this progressive approach into the legacy management systems of the big enterprises? Challenging the paradigm can sometimes have negative implications. I am an example. So what would you say to that very clever question?
I'll jump in there to say, Pedro, I'm sorry. You've had some negative impacts from challenging the paradigm. And that's a challenge for sure. I know, Edwin, you raised about 400 employees we're not, the stories you've been hearing so far today are not of massive 10,000 person organizations. And yet I think there's a lot that does scale here, just to hearing what Edwin mentioned, like get that data into the systems, like the passions, the skills, ways of incorporating the business problems that can come also from some frontline folks. That is a scalable process potentially to large organizations. And I also know that there's some neat large scale processes for doing collective intelligence, if you will, like getting teams or even whole organizations together where you're funneling up ideas. What should we do next? What's our calling right now? And then you do use like dot voting to sort of like we're doing with these questions. How do we find out what really speaks to people in terms of the opportunities ahead or the challenges ahead? And people, when people are invited into that process, these kinds of ways of setting strategy at a higher level, they're really into it. And I would guess one other thing to say is that I was at Great Place to Work, as I said, for a while. It wasn't a massive organization, but one practice we had that I think could apply well to large organizations is something we called 80 conversations, which in an IBM or a Cisco systems would be 75,000 conversations. Basically, our HR leaders having a one-on-one conversation with every employee. We had 80 employees at the time about where they want to go. It was almost like the alternative to a performance conversation. We trusted that you had done a good job generally, unless if there was big problems. We didn't tend to look backwards so much as look forward and say, where do you want to be in 5 or 10 years? And where do you see the company going? And how do you, the same kind of conversations Edward was mentioning, the 3, overlapping circles, but done in a personal way. And that makes people feel so seen. I felt so alive after these conversations I had. And I think that's something that can be adopted by large scale organizations. Maybe just you hear the points from the person sitting across from you, and you stick it in the system. So there are some things that can be put into these big conversations, in these big organizations as this new paradigm surfaces and starts to come into play.
Phenomenal.
Yeah, and I don't think I shared this part of the story. We didn't just move to self-management with 450 people in one fell swoop. In fact, it was my own little startup within the company. I think we were 10 people at the time. And I was a big believer in this. So we made all of the changes, and then it just basically worked so well within our small group of 10 people that it just started growing and growing and growing and growing.
Right.
And then at one
Amazing.
point it became an inflection point decision for all the managers in the company. All right, let's do this, right? And so that's what I would suggest that anyone in any company does, is you start with the people who believe what you believe. Don't try to convince the non-believers. Start with the people who believe what you believe. Try stuff, and then if and when it's working, it will spread, right? You won't need to push it at any point. The other thing that Ed said that we've gotten a lot of value out of is using collective decision making tools. So the tool that we use is called Lumio. It's very simple. You basically put up a proposal. Here's my problem opportunity, and people can weigh in, give their advice, and then you can move it to a decision collectively, up, down. Anyone can roll out a tool like that with any team. So I would say start with some leaders who see the problem that you see or see the opportunity that you see, and just test some things.
Nice. I love it. So we've got three more very interesting questions. I would propose to perhaps look at one and do a fire round, and we can dive into it more in our Q&A after the show session, if that's okay with you. Michelle put in a question that got multiple thumbs up, which is, on the flip side, do you have any specific thoughts on how to design roles and empower employees to work on exactly what they're good at, passionate about, in a startup environment or on a very small team? What if there are tasks or work that no one is particularly keen on owning? So quick fire round, 30 seconds. Edwin.
Just talking about it all openly, and then what you'll find in a group, that people realize, that they'll take one for the team, especially if they're getting kind of some credit for that emotionally within the team. It all works out. That has never been a problem that I've encountered.
Nice. Thanks, Edwin. Ed.
I would echo what Edwin just said. One thing I'll add is if there are tasks that no one has any energy for, maybe you don't need to do it.
Aha. That's also an interesting perspective to challenge what actually needs to be done. Awesome. Thank you both. So it's incredible how fast an hour can go by. It blows my mind. To leave us on a very inspiring note, I've prepared the last leap of the day, and I would like to hear from you both just briefly what inspires you in the space of the future of resource management.
I'm particularly inspired by how AI is going to help everyone do more of the work that they want to do, or that they're, as humans, good at and better at. And that's inspiring me deeply. I'm seeing applications all over the place. I would encourage everyone to have a glass half full, open, creative mindset towards utilizing these tools, versus I'm scared, I'm afraid, scarcity mindset towards that. So I would say, please embrace AI. It is your friend. It's going to do all the stuff you don't want to do. So maybe that's the question. Maybe that's the answer to the question. Have the AI do it. Whatever work that the people don't want to do, that's what ChatGPT is for.
Love it. Oh, that resonates a lot. Lovely, Edwin. Thank you. And what about you, Ed? What inspires you in the space of the future of resource management?
I am going to be on the other side of that technology human equation, but I think complementary to what Edwin just said. I think even as we get more advanced in our AI and our technology, it is a human era. And I think the pandemic illustrated that dramatically, that it was okay to not be okay. In so many organizations, we realized the fear we were experiencing, the sadness. We're not machine parts, we're people. And so I really think it is time to put the human in resource management.
Which is such a great bracket because it comes back to our title, putting the human into resource management. Thank you very much both for those beautiful and inspiring last words. So thank you, Ed and Edwin, very much for joining us today, for very generously sharing all of your incredible knowledge and experience for our benefit. I would like to share with all of you what's coming up next, because we've got a fantastic speaker who is going to join us in December. His name is Jeff, and I'm so gonna mispronounce his last name, Koziatek. Sorry, Jeff. He's a peak performance coach, and we're going to dive into the intriguing topic of resourcefulness, how to achieve more with less, which I think is a very timely topic as we're all experiencing heavier, higher workloads, and a lot of people are burning out. So what can we do with the workload that we've got to better deal with that, to better be capable of living and working in a joyful way? So please feel free to join us on December 5th for that session. And apart from that, there's nothing else to say except thank you, everyone. Thank you, Ed and Edwin. Thank you to our audience for your fantastic questions. It has been such a pleasure. And to check us off, I'm just going to turn on some music and invite you to share with us what you're taking from today's session, which I think is very interesting to us. So please feel free to share your key insights, what you're going to take away from today's session. And a huge thank you, everyone. It's been lovely.